to another Create Balance video. Today I'm going to talk about setting priorities. Now I've talked about setting priorities at home or in terms of parenting or in terms of what it takes to create work-life balance and the role priorities plays there. Today I want to focus on your professional life, your vocation, your work, your job, whatever you want to call it, that part of your life where you're looking for that professional fulfillment. And so we're going to talk today about how to set priorities for your professional life that keep you fulfilled and keep you from burning out even when you have a lot of other things going on. Priorities require choices. Today I want to share some tools that you can use when you don't have 100% autonomy over those choices in your workplace. So many of us work in organizations where there are some organizational missions and goals that we probably believe in to some level, but not 100%. And how do we set our own professional priorities and goals while also staying true to our organization's mission, whether that's a school or a hospital or a nonprofit? And then how do we also make sure we honor our priorities without losing sight of the organizational goals and all the other things that we need to do to keep our organization moving forward. So, what do you do? How do you set priorities when you're not 100% in charge of your workplace priorities? Let's talk about it. As always, I want to do a quick overview of the Create Balance method because that's going to highlight the way that we're going to go through and think about our workplace priorities today. So very basically, the Create Balance method has 3 parts. You always start with essential values. You decide what's most essential to you in all areas of your life, professional, parenting, and personal. Once you decide on those essential values, you have the tools you need to go forward and set those values up and live them out in your daily life. And that's where the live and balance strategies come into play. Today, we're going to be talking about the live and balance strategy of identifying urgency and importance, separating them, and then using them to set clear priorities. And then finally, there's a piece for reflection that we'll talk about at the end, because the third part of the Create Balance method is to stop and reflect and think about what you've learned and how to move forward with new essential values or revised essential values. So let's start with that essential values piece and think about what's most essential for you in your workplace. Okay, so if you're like me, you work somewhere where there is a lot of need and you probably could work 24 hours a day and still not get done all the things that really need to be done to make a difference. Whether we're teachers, whether we're social workers, whether we work in the nonprofit sector, whether we're in the service professions or caring professions, whatever we do, we're trying to give back. Most of us are in a profession where we're actually trying to give back, trying to make a difference in the world. And if we aren't in that profession, we might want to be. So the question is, how do you set priorities when you want to make a difference in the world, but there's so much need out there? Well, you start by getting really, really specific. And so I want to share 3 questions with you today that I think will really help you start to think about what are your most essential values and priorities professionally, independent of your organization. These are for you more personally. So my first question is, what legacy do you want to leave with your years of service? What legacy do you want to leave to your students, to your clients, to the kids you work with, to the adults you work with, to the patients you work with? What legacy do you want to leave to them when you are done with your job? What outcomes do you value most? What kind of outcomes make you happy? What kind of outcomes make you feel like you did a good job, that you made a contribution? And lastly, where do you want to improve? Where do you want to grow and develop as an educator, as a social worker, as a service provider? Where do you want to grow and improve in your professional life? So answering those 3 questions is going to help you sort of figure out some of the things that are most essential to you professionally, even if they aren't the things you're working on as much as you'd like to right now. So take a moment, if you're watching this, think about those. Take a minute, answer those questions. Pause the video, stop, and think about it or write it down. Okay, now into the fun part. Let's talk about what to do with your answers. So you've got some ideas about the legacies you want to leave behind, the outcomes you want to have. Let me share a few of my own, just as an example. So I'm a teacher. I teach primarily writing at this point. And what I really want my students to do when they walk out of my class as readers and writers is I want them to be able to think critically about what they read. I want them to love reading and see reading as an activity done mostly for pleasure, not as much for pain. I want them to see writing as a skill that is developed over time and that grows, not just something that's a talent that's gifted to you. And finally, in terms of my own professional growth, one thing I really want to get better at is having classroom discussions that lead to student learning. It's something I've seen work amazingly well in other places. I've seen it contribute to those same goals I have for my students, and I want to get better at that. Working towards those things will not only make my students better, make me feel like I'm doing a good job, but quite frankly, working towards those things keeps me fulfilled and keeps me from feeling burned out and wanting to just quit the whole thing. So this is another reason why it's really important when we're thinking about our essential values at work and setting really clear priorities about what's most important to us. It's not just about being productive or being focused. It's also about staying fulfilled so that we don't burn out in these incredibly emotionally demanding professions. So what we're going to do is we're going to take those things you wrote down and we're going to put them in the Live in Balance urgency importance matrix. All right, I love this grid. It sounds so fancy. It's really just 4 boxes, but it's a really powerful 4 boxes for you to look at and to keep in mind as you set these priorities. Okay, so what we're going to do is start by looking at the importance row. If you see that first part where it says important, not important, we're just going to look at the row that says important. What I would like you to do is think about which of your answers go in which boxes here. So some of the things that you said were important to you maybe are really urgent. They're really pressing professional growth plans or really pressing outcomes that you need to have for your students right now that you feel like are actually most important right here in this time. And then some might be less urgent but no less important. And I want you to sort those out. Just to give you a quick example for my side of things, I will say that in our recent political times, I'm recording this in late 2016. In our recent political times, the idea of fake news has been a big issue. So I actually found that one of my students to think critically about what they read, while it's always been a goal of mine, it has taken on a new level of urgency. Similarly, I found that strong classroom discussion, I really want to get better at that sooner rather than later. It's something I've been wanting to do for a while, so it's becoming more and more urgent for me since I'm seeing the impact. And since I'm seeing how much students are not interacting with each other on their own, they're more and more involved in their devices and less doing the in-person interaction. And I want to change that, and it seems more urgent to me. The other ones, they're important, but they're a little less urgent. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to get on them and not work on them, but they might be a slightly different priority level. So that's where my stuff goes. Take a moment, if you want to pause this, and actually draw out a little grid. It's not fancy, and put down some of your answers. Where do they go? Which of those ideas and legacies and outcomes, which of those are most urgent, and which are important but a little less urgent? Take a moment to write them down. All right, now let's take a minute, step back, and think about what are some of the priorities in your organization, whether it's a school, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a nonprofit, wherever you work. There's some missions, some goals, and there's probably some things you need to do that aren't part of those important pieces. So for this, okay, so now let's think about what are some of the priorities you have that are based on what your organization demands of you. As a teacher, I'll give you my top 3 things that are not important to me, but still are things I have to do for my job. Entering and recording grades, enforcing a tardy policy that I don't necessarily agree with, and attending required trainings that have little to no usefulness. I'm guessing some of you can empathize with me even if you're not a teacher. These are things that are part of my job. They're part of what I need to do professionally, but they're not important in the same way that my outcome and legacy desires are. So I'm going to put those in my bottom row here, the not important row, and list them as which ones are urgent and which ones are a little less urgent. Now what I've got is this grid basically telling me what my priorities are. It is not a to-do list. It's not telling me what to do first or do second the same way a to-do list would. But what it is, it's providing a guidepost for me to remind myself about what is most important in my daily work, and my weekly work, and my monthly work. This grid actually provides me with a map so that when I have to make a decision about where to spend my time and where to spend my energy, I can look and say, I want to spend most of my time and energy on that box number 1. I want to spend time and energy on box number 2. And I also want to spend time on box number 3, but that stuff is less important. Because too often we just do the stuff that's urgent for work without ever paying as close attention to the things that are professionally important to us. And when we do that, we burn out really fast. And we aren't as much of a service to the people that we're serving. So I want you to think about how can you use this grid to actually guide the decisions you make. Now, one way that I use this grid to guide the decisions I make, it's not so much about how much time I spend on things, it's about what kind of time I spend on them. So one thing I've learned about myself is I am far more creative and productive in the morning. My brain works way better in the morning than it does in the afternoon or the evening. And that's been true when I've been teaching full-time and when I've not. So I think I'm just a morning person. But either way, after a day of teaching, my brain is completely fried. So what I do is I actually make time in the morning to do some of those things in box number 1 and 2, some of the deeper thinking about how to do classroom discussion, or where I read articles about how to do these things, or where I spend a little extra time in the morning planning lessons around how to be more critical readers. I do my important stuff in the morning when I have the most energy, and I do my less important stuff that still needs to happen in the afternoon. So that's one way you can actually allocate time. It doesn't have to be that you never get to the stuff in box 3 and 4, but instead what you're doing is you're just picking the times to do them that actually aligns with when you have the most energy, so that you're putting more of your energy on the stuff that matters most and less of your energy on the stuff that matters less. Now, when it comes to the create balance method, we always come back to the reflect and reassess part, and I want to think about that today. When you've set this goals, when you've created your grid there that you're going to maybe put up on your desk or put up in your office, wherever you are, and put that up there and say, okay, when I get stuck, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, where do I want to be spending my time and energy? How can I carve out a little time for this or carve out a little energy for those things? I think what's really wonderful is to stop and reflect and say, which things are fulfilling me? So if you have a moment today or in a month from now, at some point, maybe end of the term or after the next reports are due, whatever your sort of timeline is at work, take a minute to look at your grid and say, are those things in my important row? Or are those still the things that are important to me? And those things in the not important row, have any of those moved, or can I just drop any of those? Taking time to stop and reflect and reassess where you're at with your priorities is huge in helping you move forward based on where you want to move forward, not just where you think you have to move forward. Would just like to wrap up by saying that many of us do the work that we do because we want to be of service, because we want to make a difference in the world. We don't just do it for the paycheck. The paycheck's part of it, but we do it because we want to make a difference in the world. We want to leave the world a better place than we found it, and we want to be of service to people. And doing that work requires a lot of emotional energy. And one of the ways that you maintain that emotional energy, one of those ways you keep from burning out, is to find ways to stay personally fulfilled at your work, to stay personally connected. Whether that's making sure you go out of your way to build a little bit extra relationships with your students or clients, whether that's doing the deeper planning and the deeper thinking that you enjoy, the stuff that doesn't always feel as urgent, right? You probably could do the job without doing some of those things that are in your important column, but it wouldn't be the job that you love. And I think that that's what I want to come down to, is I think that setting these priorities is about more than being productive or efficient. It's actually about reminding ourselves why we love what we do and making sure we have time as often as possible every day or every week to do the parts of the job that we love the most, so that when we have to do the parts that we don't love quite as much, we're okay. It's those parts that we love will sustain us through those other times, and those parts that we love will keep us from being burned out, and those parts that I love will give us energy, so we have energy to give to our students, to our clients, and then later to our own children and our partners and the other people in our lives. Because creating balance isn't just about getting a bunch of stuff done, it's about feeling fulfilled in all areas of your life, the personal, the professional, and the parenting. So I just want to leave you with that idea. Setting priorities is about making choices, and when you can make those choices intentionally and thoughtfully, you can have results that leave you feeling much more fulfilled and creating the balance on your terms, not anybody else's. Thanks so much for watching.